I died holding up 140 pounds of shattering glass atrium, and the last thing I heard was Alexander Whitfield screaming my name like it was the only word he still remembered how to say. Which, honestly, rude. I had a whole life. Hobbies I never got around to. A 401k I barely contributed to. A Netflix queue with 41 unfinished shows on it. And my last conscious thought was, so this is what a skylight sounds like when it decides to become confetti. So when I opened my eyes and found myself staring at the water-stained ceiling of my old studio apartment in Raleigh, the one with the crack shaped like Florida that my landlord swore was cosmetic, I did what any reasonable freshly undead architect would do. I checked my phone. October 3rd, 9 days before the unveiling party at Seaview Crest Villa, out on the point past Nag's Head. 9 days before Hurricane Odette jumped the forecast by a full 2 days, and slammed into the Outer Banks 2 days ahead of every model the meteorologists trusted, turned a 3-story glass atrium into a wind tunnel of razor confetti, and turned me into a cautionary tale that people would tell at safety briefings for the next decade. I sat up so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. Okay, I said to my empty apartment, to the ceiling crack, to whatever cosmic customer service rep had processed my complaint about dying stupid. Okay, we are doing this again. Cool. I want to be clear that I did not, in that moment, think this is my chance to fix everything and finally get the alpha CEO of my dreams to love me back. What I thought was, I am never going near that man's family villa during hurricane season again as long as I live, which this time is going to be a while. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about being the architect who designs some alpha real estate mogul's dream house. You become collateral. You become the guy who has to be on site, just in case, standing around in a hard hat while a man who smells unfairly good barks into 3 phones at once about whether the imported Italian marble is warm enough for a villa that's about to get hit by a storm named after somebody's grandmother. In my last life, I designed Seaview Crest Villa for Whitfield Coastal Holdings. I fell, hard, stupidly, in a way that violated at least 3 lines of my own consulting contract, for Alexander Whitfield, the alpha heir who ran the company like he was allergic to losing. I spent 11 months redesigning his family's crown jewel property on the Outer Banks, and I spent every one of those months pretending I didn't notice the way he looked at blueprints, the same way he apparently looked at me, like something he wanted to own and understand at the same time. Then his cousin's business partner, a smarmy little land shark named Preston Cole, decided the unveiling party was the perfect night to sabotage the whole project, discredit Alex in front of half the East Coast's investors, and conveniently blame the amateur architect for cutting corners on the atrium's storm bracing. I didn't cut corners. I built that atrium to code and then some. But Preston had swapped out the bracing hardware 2 days before the party, and when the storm came in early, the glass didn't hold, and I was the idiot standing under it, shoving Alex out of the way, because some pathetic, love-struck part of my brain decided his life was worth more than mine. He never even knew it was Preston. Last I saw, Alex was cradling my very dead body and shouting at people to call 911 like that was going to unperforate my lung. Great story. 10 out of 10. Would not recommend. So, new plan. This time when Alexander Whitfield calls me at 11 p.m. asking whether the vibe of the great room reads more coastal fortress or coastal flirtation, an actual sentence he said to me in my past life. I am going to let that man handle his own hurricane party. No more diving in front of glass. No more redesigning entire wings because he made a face at the floor plan. No more pretending my heart doesn't do something embarrassing every time he says my name like it's a full sentence. Daniel, 2 syllables. He could ruin me with 2 syllables. Not this time. I got up, made coffee, and opened my laptop to the group chat with my best friend Mia Sanders, who had zero idea she was about to become my only living confidant in a rerun of the worst 9 days of my life. Me, hey, random question. Hypothetically, if I told you I've lived this exact week before, would you believe me or have me committed? Mia, depends. Does hypothetical you know the score of the Panthers game tonight? Me, 24-17 Panthers, Hooper throws a pick 6 in the 4th that everyone screams about for a week. Mia, okay, following up in 4 hours, don't at me if you're wrong. She was not going to have to wait 4 hours. She was going to have to reckon with the fact that her best friend had apparently unlocked time travel and used it so far exclusively to avoid a hurricane and 1-1. Devastatingly hot real estate alpha. I told myself that was a reasonable use of a second chance. If you're already invested in whether I manage to keep my hands and my heart off the client this time, do me a favor and follow along. This ride gets a lot worse before it gets better, and I'd hate for you to miss the part where a hurricane personally ruins my life on a schedule. I told myself the no more saving him plan was reasonable for approximately 6 more hours, right up until my phone rang with a number I hadn't saved in this timeline yet, but that my whole nervous system recognized instantly, like a smoke alarm going off in a part of my brain I didn't know I still had. I stared at the screen. Whitfield Coastal Holdings. No, I told my apartment. Absolutely not. We are not doing the voice thing. I answered it anyway. Growth is a myth. I contain multitudes and also zero self-control. Daniel Carter, said the voice on the other end, low and amused, like he already knew I'd been dreading this call for reasons he couldn't possibly guess. You designed my grandmother's villa. I need you to come look at something before the storm gets here. I closed my eyes. No more saving him, I reminded myself. Define something, I said, already reaching for my keys. Before I tell you what happened when I got to Seaview Crest, you should meet the man properly, because devastatingly hot real estate alpha doesn't quite cover it and frankly does him a disservice. Alexander Whitfield, 30 years old, CEO of Whitfield Coastal Holdings, third-generation heir to a company that had been quietly buying up the best stretches of North Carolina coastline since the Eisenhower administration. 6'3" of alpha in a company polo he somehow made look like a runway piece. Sharp jaw, sharper business instincts, and a smile he deployed like a tactical weapon, rare, devastating, and always aimed with intent. He was, by every metric that mattered to the tabloids that covered coastal Carolina's most eligible, a catch. He was also, by every metric that mattered to me, a menace, because the man had never once in either timeline learned how to ask for help, instead of just standing in a room radiating, I have a problem, and I've decided you're going to fix it until somebody caved. Usually me. I pulled up to the villa 40 minutes later. The drive out to the point never got shorter no matter which life I was living, and I spent most of it seriously reconsidering the whole showing up part of this plan, and found him standing on the half-finished terrace in the gray pre-storm light, staring up at the atrium frame like he could win an argument with it through sheer will. You could have called a structural engineer, I said, climbing out of my truck. I do the pretty parts. I don't do is this going to fall on my head. You designed the pretty parts and signed off on the bracing, Alex said, not turning around. So technically it's your problem either way. That's not how liability works. It is if I decide it is. I walked up beside him and looked where he was looking. The atrium, 3 stories of glass and steel that I had, in fact, poured an embarrassing number of caffeinated nights into, sat gleaming and half-finished against a sky that was starting to bruise purple at the edges. Way too early for a storm the local news was still calling a week out, nothing to worry about yet, except I knew better. I knew Odette was going to jump the forecast and slam into the Outer Banks 2 full days ahead of schedule, like she had a personal vendetta against unveiling parties specifically. You feel that? I asked, before I could stop myself. Alex glanced at me. Feel what? Nothing. Don't. Don't do the thing where you warn him and become the guy who somehow always knows things. That's how you end up dead under glass again. What's the emergency, Whitfield? I have a life, allegedly. That got the smile. The small private one, not the tactical one. It did something unfair to my pulse. The hardware crew swapped the atrium bracing kit yesterday, he said. New vendor. Family recommendation. I want you to look at it before Saturday. My stomach did a slow, cold roll. Family recommendation. That was Preston's opening move. 1 link removed. 2 days from now, in my last life, anyway, he'd swap out the load-bearing bracing bolts for hardware store knockoffs, rated for a garden shed, not a hurricane. Last time, I never checked. I trusted the paperwork because I trusted him, Alex, the company, the whole gleaming machine, and I paid for it with my sternum. This time, my mouth said, entirely without my permission, show me. So much for no more saving him. In my defense, this wasn't saving him. This was saving myself from becoming a cautionary safety briefing anecdote a second time. Purely selfish. I would be telling myself that for the rest of the week. We climbed the scaffolding together. Alex first, because apparently CEOs have to personally inspect every bolt on their family legacy, and me right behind him, trying very hard not to notice how the wind off the Atlantic pushed his shirt against his back like it, too, had a crush. "Here," Alex said, crouching at the base of the main support strut, pointing at a cluster of anchor bolts gleaming a little too shiny, a little too new, a little too wrong against the aged steel around them. I pulled a multi-tool out of my jacket. Some habits followed me across timelines, apparently, and tested the torque on one. It gave way with almost no resistance at all. Garden shed hardware, exactly like I remembered, rated for maybe 40 pounds of lateral load. The atrium, fully assembled with glass and fixtures, was going to put roughly 4,000 pounds of lateral load on this exact point the second Odette's outer bands hit. "That's not code," I said, keeping my voice flat, professional, absolutely not the voice of a man who had died because of this exact bolt in a previous life. "That's not even close to code." Alex went very still in the particular way big, powerful men go still right before they get quietly, dangerously furious. "Who signed off on the vendor swap?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a man mentally drafting a termination letter. "I don't know yet," I said, which was true, technically, since this time I hadn't waited until after the disaster to find out. "But I'd get every one of these bolts pulled and replaced before Saturday, or you're not having a party. You're having a structural collapse with a signature cocktail." He looked at me for a long moment, that assessing look, the one that used to make me feel simultaneously interviewed and undressed, and then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Short, surprised, real, like it had escaped before he'd approved it. "A structural collapse with a signature cocktail," he repeated. "I'm putting that on the save the date." "Please don't. Too late. I'm framing this conversation. I should have laughed too. Instead, something in my chest went tight and warm and entirely too familiar because this, the banter, the way he looked at me like I'd said something worth keeping, this was exactly the thing that got me killed last time. Not the bolts, the this. The way I let myself fall for a man who smelled like cedar and ocean and said my name like a bet he intended to win. "I'll call the vendor," Alex said, already pulling out his phone, already moving into CEO mode, jaw set. "And I want you back here tomorrow to walk the whole structure with me. Every strut. I'm not losing anyone at this party. Anyone. Not you." I noted the wording with the specific, ridiculous heartbreak of a man who has already died once for this guy, and would apparently, given the opportunity, consider doing it again. "Fine," I said, "but I'm charging overtime." He said thank you the way most people don't know how to, like he meant to hang on to the receipt. I told myself this was just good architecture. I told myself that for approximately 11 more minutes, right up until Alex reached out, steadied me on the swaying scaffold platform with one hand flat against my lower back. Casual, automatic, like his body had made the decision before his brain weighed in, and I forgot, briefly and catastrophically, how to form words at all. Here's something you should know about me in either lifetime. Given a genuine day off with nothing technically on fire, I will find a way to do absolutely nothing with it. It's a talent. Possibly my only one that doesn't involve blueprints. Friday should have been that day. Alex didn't call. The bolts were being replaced by an actual licensed crew instead of whatever discount operation Preston had lined up. I had, by every reasonable metric, earned a full 24 hours of doing nothing but reheating leftover pad thai and rewatching a baking competition show I'd already seen twice. I made it exactly until 11 a.m. "You're being an idiot," I told my ceiling crack, which had opinions about everything lately, apparently. "You know exactly who's behind this, and you're going to sit here eating cold noodles instead of doing something useful with the fact that you already know how this movie ends." The ceiling crack did not disagree. So, deeply against my own better instincts and general commitment to laziness, I spent the afternoon doing the single least fun thing an architect can do, reading vendor paperwork. Boring, dense, soul-crushing paperwork, cross-referencing every subcontractor Whitfield Coastal Holdings had brought onto the villa project against the public business filings I could pull up on my laptop between episodes. It took 3 hours and roughly a full pot of coffee, but there it was, buried in the fine print of the hardware vendor's LLC registration, filed just 2 weeks earlier, a listed agent whose last name matched a name I already hated on a cellular level, Cole. Not Preston himself, not yet, not directly. The LLC was registered to a shell entity, careful, deliberate, professionally sloppy in exactly the way a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else tended to be. but it was enough of a thread that I could feel the whole ugly tapestry underneath it, the same one I'd watched unravel over my own dead body in a version of this story that technically didn't exist anymore. I did not call Alex. Partly because I found your cousin's business partner's shell company while binge-watching a baking show instead of doing literally anything else today was not a sentence I could say with a straight face, and partly because I wanted more than a paper trail before I set that particular fire. I texted Mia instead, because some things you have to say out loud to someone, even if that someone can't fully appreciate the stakes yet. Me. Found something. Can't prove it yet, but I think I know who's trying to sink Alex's launch party. Mia. Ooh, a mystery. Does this involve the hot alpha you apparently kissed in a life I don't remember? Me. We haven't kissed yet in this life. That's a whole different chapter. Focus. Mia. Yet. Noted. Keep me posted, detective. I closed the laptop, ate the rest of the cold pad thai directly out of the container like a man with nothing left to prove, and told myself I'd earned the rest of my lazy Friday. I had not, in fact, earned it. My phone buzzed twice more before dinner. First Mia, sending 3 separate exclamation points and no words, which I chose to interpret as encouragement rather than alarm, and then at 9 p.m., Alex, wanting my opinion on whether the emergency backup generators should be staged somewhere more discreet. Define discreet, I said, muting the baking show for what felt like the 4th time that day. Somewhere my grandmother won't see them and start referring to the villa as the bunker to every guest at the party. She's going to call it the bunker regardless. I've met your grandmother exactly twice, and I already know that. That's fair, Alex admitted, and I could hear him smiling through the phone, which should not have been possible and was somehow the most annoying thing about him. Okay, new question. If I told you I spent 40 minutes today arguing with a caterer about whether shrimp cocktail counts as a coastal appetizer or a Jurek one, would you still respect me as a business leader? I never respected you as a business leader. I respect you as a man who signs my invoices on time. Brutal. Accurate, but brutal. We stayed on the phone for the better part of an hour, technically discussing generator placement, and, in practice, discussing absolutely nothing important at all. His terrible taste in golf, my even worse taste in reality television, the fact that neither of us had eaten a real vegetable in 3 days. It was, without either of us saying so out loud, the exact kind of conversation that had nothing to do with hurricanes or sabotage or grand romantic gestures, and everything to do with 2 people quietly deciding they liked spending time in each other's ordinary hours, not just the dramatic ones. I went to bed with the specific, dangerous warmth of a man who was very clearly already in trouble again, and the distinct, giddy suspicion that this time I was going to let myself stay that way. Here's a fact about near-death experiences. They rearrange your priorities, whether you consent to it or not. Saturday. 2 days after the bolt discovery, exactly a week before the party, Alex called an emergency site meeting. Not because of the bracing, which was already swapped out for the real thing under his personal terrifying supervision, but because the vendor he'd fired turned out to be a shell company that traced, with almost insulting ease, straight back to his cousin's business partner. Preston Cole. I already knew, obviously. I just hadn't said anything yet, because I died in a timeline where you didn't catch this, is not a sentence that goes over well at a Saturday morning site meeting. Bradley vouched for the vendor, Alex said, pacing the half-finished great room like a man who wanted to put his fist through the very expensive drywall. Bradley Whitfield, Alex's younger cousin, 29, VP of something with partnerships in the title, the human equivalent of a golden retriever who had never once said no to anyone who smiled at him first, sat slumped in a folding chair nearby, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on the East Coast. I trusted him because he's blood, and I didn't check, and if you hadn't caught the bolts. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. In the timeline where I hadn't caught the bolts, we both knew exactly how it ended, even though he had no memory of it and I had every memory of it, permanently, like a scar only I could see. I caught them, I said. That's the job. Don't spiral on me, Whitfield. You've got a hurricane party to throw. Storm, he corrected, distracted. It's a hurricane, not a... He stopped, frowned at me. Why do you keep calling it a typhoon? Oh, right. Force of habit, apparently, from a life where the difference had stopped mattering, somewhere around the moment glass started raining on me. Regional confusion, I said. I'm from inland. We don't get a lot of practice with the ocean ones. He didn't push it, but he watched me a second too long, like he was cataloging something. Which was fair, because I was being weird. I had, in fact, been weird for 2 straight days, torn between do not get emotionally involved with this man again, and the simple biological reality that being near him made my whole nervous system light up like a switchboard. It was outside, 20 minutes later, on the half-built terrace overlooking the churning gray Atlantic, that the moment happened. The moment Mia would later insist. Once I finally told her the whole insane story needed to happen way earlier than the middle. Daniel, nobody wants to wait forever for the good part. We were alone. The construction crew had cleared out for the afternoon, spooked by the tightening forecast. Wind was picking up, tasting like salt and ozone, the kind of wind that made your skin feel electric and stupid and brave. I want to show you something, Alex said, and led me to the edge of the terrace where the original blueprints, my blueprints, the first drafts, the ones with his handwritten notes crawling up the margins, were pinned under a paperweight against the wind. You kept these? I asked, genuinely startled. In my last life, he'd never shown me this. We never got that far. I keep rereading your margin notes, he admitted, and there it was. The crack in the armor, right on schedule, right when the story needed it, right when I needed it, apparently, after 2 days of white-knuckling my own heart into submission. You wrote this room should feel like the ocean is choosing to let you stay dry next to the great room windows. Nobody talks about architecture like that. I started designing my whole pitch to investors around that sentence. The wind kicked up hard enough to snap the paperweight loose and send the blueprints scattering, and Alex lunged, caught me by the wrist when I lunged too, and for one suspended, electric second we were both crouched on the terrace with a fistful of flying paper and no space left between us at all. Daniel, he said, 2 syllables, full sentence. His hand still around my wrist, thumb resting right over my pulse, which was absolutely betraying me at this point, hammering like it wanted him to notice. He probably noticed. Alphas usually did. You have. I started, meaning to say paper on your face or terrible timing or literally anything that wasn't what actually came out of my mouth, which was, you have no idea how many times I've thought about this. His eyes went dark and focused in a way that should be illegal for a man who was also, technically, my client. How many times? He repeated, low, testing the words like he wanted to make sure he'd heard them right. The wind screamed past the exposed steel of the atrium frame above us, and somewhere in the back of my mind a voice that sounded suspiciously like every bad decision I'd ever made whispered this is exactly how it starts. And I could not, for the life of me, literally, for the life of me, twice now, make myself care. Once for every night I stood in your driveway, trying to figure out how to tell you the atrium calculations checked out 3 times, because I kept using it as an excuse to call you, I said. So, a lot. The number is a lot. Alex let out a laugh that startled even him, like it had been sitting under his ribs for years waiting on permission. And then he wasn't laughing anymore. He was closing the distance, one hand still around my wrist, and the other coming up to my jaw like he'd done it 1,000 times in some other life he had no memory of, and he kissed me on a half-finished terrace with a hurricane a week out, and blueprints scattering around our knees like confetti at the world's most inconvenient wedding. It was not subtle, it was not slow. It tasted like salt air and certainty, and I kissed him back with every ounce of the desperate, borrowed-time gratitude of a man who genuinely did not expect to get a second shot at this, at him, at any of it. When we finally broke apart, he kept his forehead against mine, breathing like he'd run somewhere. I've wanted to do that since the day you told me my grandmother's sunroom needed less ego and more light, he admitted. That sunroom did need less ego, I know. That's why I hired you again for the villa instead of firing you on the spot. Romantic. I'm working on it, Alex said, and kissed me again, softer this time, like he had all the time in the world. He didn't, technically. None of us did. Odette was still coming, 2 days ahead of every forecast, and Preston Cole was still out there plotting something with the moral complexity of a raccoon in a trench coat. But for 1 full minute on that terrace, I let myself have this, the good part, early, exactly like it should have come the first time, and decided that whatever happened next Saturday, I was not doing this life the way I did the last one. This time, I wasn't dying for him. This time, we were both going to survive the party, together. Even if I had to personally throw Preston Cole into the ocean to make it happen, I want it on the record that Sunday was, once again, supposed to be a day off. I had a system. A very good system involving pajamas, terrible reality television, and a strict no-hurricane-related business policy that lasted, this time, a full 9 hours before Mia Sanders let herself into my apartment with her own key, and a look on her face I recognized from 3 separate group projects in architecture school. "You," she said, dropping her tote bag on my kitchen counter with the specific violence of a woman on a mission, kissed. The client. I did not get up from the couch. Some principles are worth defending. I prefer the client kissed me, actually. Legally, that's an important distinction. Daniel. You told me 2 weeks ago you'd rather eat glass than get emotionally entangled with rich alpha energy. Direct quote. And now you're telling me you've been reliving this week on a loop, and the first thing you did with your infinite wisdom was make out with him on a terrace? The bolts were also a priority, I said, not moving from the couch cushion I had claimed as my permanent residence. I fixed the bolts and kissed him. Multitasking. Also, I found the shell company Preston's using yesterday, so really I've been very productive for a man in his pajamas at 2 p.m. Mia stared at me for a long moment, then sighed the sigh of a woman who had given up trying to logic her way through my life choices sometime around junior year, and sat down on the arm of the couch anyway, because some habits die harder than others. Fine, okay. Time travel boyfriend drama, got it, moving on. Since you're apparently the villa's newest unofficial fraud investigator, I need you to help me with the seating chart later this week, because Bradley Whitfield's +1 is somehow also on the vendor list for the AV company, and I don't trust that man's face. His name is Preston Cole, I said. He is the reason I nearly died under glass in a life you don't remember. Don't trust his face or his AV contract. Mia blinked, noted. I'm putting him on the list of things I'm choosing to believe without further explanation, right under my best friend apparently knows the Panthers score before it happens. You checked? 24-17. Hooper threw a pick 6, Mia said, deeply unimpressed. I'm reevaluating my entire understanding of reality, but sure, let's plan a hurricane party, also. Since when do you have Whitfield Coastal Holdings as the event planner's client, and also as your boyfriend's family company? Because I got hired for this gig 3 weeks ago and you conveniently never mentioned you already had history there. It's a long story that involves me dying, I said. I'll explain over the good takeout, not the leftover pad thai I've been eating since Friday. That's not an explanation, that's a bribe. Is it working? Mia considered the question with the seriousness of a woman who had, in fact, already decided. Get your shoes on. You're buying, and you're telling me everything. And if any part of this story involves you almost dying again before Saturday, I reserve the right to physically relocate you somewhere with no glass ceilings whatsoever. I did get my shoes on eventually, after a respectable amount of complaining about how Sundays were sacred, and I had earned this couch fair and square. But I told her everything over dumplings 2 hours later anyway, because apparently even in a second life, I still couldn't say no to Mia Sanders when she used that voice. Monday brought me face to face with Eleanor Whitfield, Alex's 81-year-old grandmother, and the actual reason the villa existed at all. She'd grown up summering on this stretch of coastline before the Whitfield family holdings swallowed most of it, and she wanted one last house on the point before. In her own gleeful words, "The ocean or my hip gives out, whichever loses the race first." She found me on the terrace that afternoon, cane in one hand, martini in the other, entirely unbothered by the fact that the forecast had just been upgraded to monitor closely. "You're the one my grandson can't stop talking about," she said, without preamble. "Good. He's been unbearable since March. Are you an Omega?" "Beta, ma'am." "Shame. Would have made the wedding easier to plan, less arguing about nesting instincts. Not a deal-breaker, though." She sipped her martini, studying me with the same assessing look Alex had, minus about 60 years of trying to hide it. "You built my sunroom, right?" First architect in a decade who understood that a house should let you look at the ocean, not perform for it. I approve. We just... You kissed on my terrace Saturday. I have binoculars and no shame. Don't waste my time being modest, young man. I'm 81 and the storm's coming early. I can feel it in my hip. So can I, ma'am, I thought, and said nothing, because explaining the whole reincarnation situation to Eleanor Whitfield felt like a conversation that deserved its own hurricane, possibly its own zip code. I also hear, she added, tapping her cane against the terrace railing with the satisfaction of a woman who knew exactly how much chaos she was about to introduce, that you've been quietly investigating my great-nephew's business partner. Good. I never liked that man's handshake. Too dry. Man's got something to hide when his handshake's that dry. You have opinions about handshakes. I have opinions about everything, dear. It's why people pay attention to me. Fix my grandson's problem. Marry into this family. Give me something to redecorate the guest wing for. In whatever order works for you, though I do have a preference. She left me on the terrace with an empty martini glass she somehow expected me to carry inside, and the distinct, terrifying impression that Eleanor Whitfield had already planned my future in more detail than I had. By Tuesday, I had a name, a paper trail, and, thanks to a full lazy Friday I still maintained I'd earned, enough of a head start on Preston Cole that I genuinely enjoyed watching him walk onto the property that afternoon like he owned it. Preston Cole, 32, beta, self-described strategic development consultant, actual profession, professional weasel. He showed up under the guise of checking on the AV setup, which mostly involved him lurking near the atrium's electrical panel, looking exactly as suspicious as a man who'd once gotten me fatally impaled by glass had any right to look. Daniel Carter, he said, oiling his way over with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. I hear you're the architect and the boyfriend now. Overachiever, Preston, I said. Fascinating that the AV panel needs checking 3 separate times this week. Really thorough work. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt, Preston didn't seem built for guilt, more like mild irritation at being seen. Word travels fast in a messy business, and I had a feeling Bradley had already mentioned, somewhere between apologies, that the Bolt scam had been caught early this time. Just being diligent, he said. Big night Saturday. Wouldn't want anything to go wrong. No, I agreed, holding his gaze, we wouldn't. He left shortly after that, and I spent the next hour walking every inch of that atrium's wiring with a flashlight and a very specific, very personal grudge, because in my last life I never once suspected Preston until it was too late, and this time I had the enormous petty advantage of already knowing exactly what kind of man he was, and now, thanks to a boring Friday afternoon of paperwork I never wanted to read, exactly what kind of shell company he liked to hide behind. I found it around 6 p.m., a secondary relay spliced into the backup generator line, rigged to fail the moment the storm knocked out primary power, which, in a house full of investors during a hurricane, would plunge the atrium into total darkness at the worst possible moment, likely during Alex's keynote toast, likely in front of every camera in the room. Not deadly, just deeply, expensively humiliating. Preston's revenge was petty and reputational this time, not structural, which honestly tracked, since without the compromised bolts, he didn't have access to anything actually dangerous anymore. He downgraded from attempted manslaughter to attempted embarrassment, and something about that felt, in a dark comedic way, like justice already halfway served. I did not fix it immediately. I texted Mia. Instead, me found Preston's sabotage. It's petty this time, not dangerous. I have an idea, and it involves humiliating him in front of every investor on the East Coast. Mia. Oh, thank God, finally something I can actually help plan. I have been waiting for petty revenge energy all week. Meet me at the villa tomorrow. Bring the extra AV remotes and your most evil clipboard. Mia, already clearing my schedule. I love hurricane season. Wednesday, Mia and I set up shop in the half-finished great room with a laptop, 6 AV remotes, a bag of gas station snacks, and the specific energy of 2 people plotting something they were both far too excited about. Okay, Mia said, spreading printouts of the security camera layout across a folding table like a general briefing troops. You said the relay's rigged to kill the power during his toast, which means we don't disable it early, we let it fire, and we make sure every single screen in this room is already running a different program the second it does. Security footage, I said. Preston, standing at the panel, narrating his own crime like a man who's never once considered consequences. Do we have security footage of that? We will, I said, because I'm going to personally set up a discrete camera on that panel tonight, and I'm going to bet actual money that a man who talks to himself while sabotaging AV equipment is going to talk to himself while sabotaging AV equipment a second time. Mia stared at me. You have gotten so much more chaotic since you started dying for love. It happened once, technically, in a version of events that no longer exists. Sure, once. Anyway, she tapped the printout. I can route the override so all 6 screens flip to the footage the second the relay trips, which will also conveniently be the exact moment Alex is mid-tasked in front of every investor who matters. Maximum audience, minimum mercy. You're better at this than the event planning. I contain multitudes. She popped a chip in her mouth, considering the layout with the satisfaction of a woman finally getting to use her clipboard for something other than seating charts. Also, for the record, I'm charging Whitfield Coastal Holdings a bonus for crisis choreography after this. I've earned it. You've absolutely earned it. We spent 2 more hours running the numbers, rehearsing the timing, and because apparently I still couldn't help myself, arguing about whether the security footage should have dramatic music behind it when it played on the screens. Mia won that argument. There would be dramatic music. She was, annoyingly, right that it would land better. By the time I finally drove home that night, exhausted and grinning in a way that had nothing to do with sleep deprivation, I had a plan, a co-conspirator, and, for the first time in either lifetime, the genuine petty satisfaction of getting to choose exactly how this story ended for the man who'd once ended mine. Alex called right as I pulled into my driveway, because apparently the man had developed some kind of internal radar for exactly when I was thinking about him, which was frankly unfair given how much I'd been thinking about him all week. "You sound suspiciously pleased with yourself," he said, no greeting, like he already knew. "I'm always pleased with myself. It's part of my charm." Mia texted me a single word an hour ago. It said chows, followed by 4 exclamation points. "Should I be worried?" "You should be excited," I said, letting myself into my apartment, phone wedged against my shoulder. "You'll see Saturday. Trust me." "I do," Alex said, simply, easily, like it cost him nothing at all to say it, and something in my chest did the same embarrassing flip it had been doing all week, the one I still hadn't found a way to make sound casual, even to myself. "That's dangerous," I told him. "Trusting me, I have a documented history of terrible decisions this week. You also have a documented history of being right about literally everything that's tried to ruin my life in the last week," Alex said. "I'll take my chances." I hung up an hour later than I meant to, stomach sore from laughing at nothing in particular, and fell asleep still half grinning at my ceiling. The crack shaped like Florida, the same one that had watched me wake up 9 days ago with a plan to keep this man at arm's length. It had, by that point, watched me fail spectacularly and repeatedly at that plan, and I found, lying there, that I didn't mind the failure nearly as much as I'd expected to. Thursday night, with the sabotage countermeasures already quietly in place, and Preston blissfully unaware, he was 2 days from public humiliation. Alex showed up at my rental with 2 bags of takeout and the specific hunted look of a man who had spent all day pretending to run a company while actually just thinking about a kiss on a terrace. "I come bearing shrimp and rice," he announced, holding up the bags like a peace offering. "And an ulterior motive. Which is?" "I wanted to see you somewhere that wasn't a construction site or a hurricane staging ground. Revolutionary concept, I know." "Bold of you to assume I'm not just going to make you watch my baking show," I said, already reaching for the containers. "I have opinions about blind bakes." "Strong ones." "I've heard worse dates," Alex said, dropping onto my couch like he belonged there, which, annoyingly, he already sort of did. We ate on my couch, which was aggressively unglamorous compared to everything I'd seen of his life so far. No ocean view, no imported marble, just a second-hand coffee table and a lamp with a crooked shade that I kept meaning to fix and never did. Alex looked entirely, suspiciously at ease there, shoes off, tie long gone, laughing at my terrible taste in throw pillows like he'd found something he wanted to keep, and losing an argument about soggy-bottom pastry with the total commitment of a man who had never once lost an actual business negotiation in his life. "Can I ask you something?" he said, halfway through the shrimp, in the careful tone of a man who already knew the question might land wrong. "You've been different this week." Sharper, like you already know how things are going to go before they happen. The bolts, Preston. "You knew about him before I did, didn't you?" My stomach dropped somewhere around my ankles. Here it is, I thought. The part where I either lie to him or hand him a truth he has no framework to hold. I had a bad feeling, I said, which was true in the loosest, most cowardly possible sense. About the vendor, about the storm timeline. Call it architect's intuition. Architect's intuition that also knew the Panthers score 3 days early? I choked on a shrimp. "Mia told you about that." Mia tells me everything. It's honestly a security risk for you. He softened, though, watching me with something patient instead of suspicious. Okay, not tonight. But if there's ever a version of this where you're carrying something heavy by yourself, I'd rather know. Even the weird stuff. Especially the weird stuff. Noted, I said, throat-tight thut, and reached for a different kind of honesty instead, one that felt safer, easier to hand over first. Tell me something you've never told anyone. Trade secrets. Since we're doing vulnerability now. He thought about it, genuinely thought about it, in a way that made something in my chest go soft. I hated this company for most of my 20s, he admitted. Wanted to be an architect, actually. Applied to the same program you went to, back when I was 22. Didn't get in. Came home, took over the family business instead, and told myself I was fine with it. You wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build things that meant something instead of just closing deals that made my father proud. He shrugged, self-deprecating, the tactical smile, making a brief, defensive appearance before dissolving into something more honest. Then I hired you to redesign the villa, and I got to watch someone actually do the thing I gave up on. It's a little embarrassing how much I like watching you work. That's not embarrassing, I said. That's just. I stopped because the word sitting right there, ready to be said, was love, and it was 6 days too early to say it out loud even if it was already, humiliatingly, true. That's just a good reason to keep me around. Cheaper than hiring an actual therapist, probably. I have a therapist. She'd love this conversation. Please never tell her about the atrium bolts. She'll bill you extra for the trauma. Alex laughed, loud, surprised, real, nothing like his boardroom voice. And then he wasn't laughing anymore. He was kissing me, rice-flavored and unglamorous, and somehow the best kiss of either of my 2 lifetimes. Right there on a second-hand couch under a crooked lamp, no hurricane in sight yet, just 2 men figuring out, slowly, stupidly, gladly, how to be honest with each other 1 piece at a time, and 1 shrimp fried rice container at a time. Friday. The day before the party. The day I fully intended to spend doing absolutely nothing stressful, because I had apparently learned nothing from the previous 9 days, turned out to be the single most chaotic day of the entire week, and it had nothing to do with hurricanes or sabotage at all. It had to do with the seating chart. Explain to me, I said, staring at the whiteboard Mia had commandeered in the villa's staging room, covered edge to edge in sticky notes. Why table 12 has been erased 4 times? Because Bradley Whitfield's ex-girlfriend RSVP'd this morning, and Bradley Whitfield's current situationship also RSVP'd this morning, and neither of them know the other one is coming, and I have exactly 0 interest in being the person responsible for that particular structural collapse. We already have 1 structural collapse to worry about. I'd rather not add a second, more personal one. That's what I said, Mia threw her hands up. So now I'm doing math. If I put the X at table 12 and the situationship at table 6, but table 6 is next to the bar, and the X also drinks, that's a collision course. If I move the situationship to table 9, that's next to Eleanor, and Eleanor already told me this morning she doesn't do small talk with people who can't hold a martini, which apparently is a direct quote about the situationship specifically. Eleanor's met the situationship. Eleanor has met everyone, Daniel. She has binoculars and a network that would make the CIA nervous. I laughed so hard I had to sit down, which is how I ended up spending my supposedly stress-free Friday afternoon reorganizing an 18-table seating chart with a woman who had, by that point, developed a full flow chart with color-coded relationship drama, while Eleanor wandered in periodically to offer opinions I hadn't asked for, and Alex texted me increasingly unhinged updates from a vendor call about ice sculptures. Alex, the ice sculpture guy, wants to know if we want the Whitfield family crest carved into a swan, or a swan carved to look like it's holding the family crest. Me, why are those different options? Alex, I don't know. I've been on this call for 40 minutes. I think I've lost the ability to have preferences. Me, get the swan, no crest. Let the bird just be a bird, Alex. Alex, thank you. This is the most useful thing anyone has said to me all day. By the time the sun went down, we'd solved the seating chart, survived the swan crisis, and I'd eaten an entire bag of Eleanor's emergency terrace snacks, while pretending to help her reorganize the bar cart, mostly because it involved sitting down and she didn't seem to mind. It was, against every reasonable expectation for the day before a hurricane party with an active saboteur on the guest list, one of the easiest, funniest days of the whole week. The kind of day I hadn't gotten in my last life at all, because in my last life I'd spent this exact Friday quietly panicking about feelings I never said out loud. This time, I said most of them out loud. It helped more than I expected. The one moment that almost cracked the whole easy day open came right before sunset, when Eleanor caught me alone on the bar cart duty and set down her martini with the deliberate care of a woman about to say something she'd been sitting on all week. "You've got the look," she said. "What look?" "The look my late husband used to get before he told me something he thought would scare me off. Spoiler, young man, it never did. I buried 3 business rivals and 1 hurricane evacuation order out of sheer stubbornness. I am not easily scared off." "I'm not hiding anything," I said, which was, at that exact moment, the least convincing sentence I had said all week. Eleanor studied me the way she studied everything, like she already knew the answer and simply wanted to see how long it would take me to catch up to her. "Whatever it is," she said finally, patting my hand with fingers that were surprisingly strong for 81, "I hope you tell him before the wedding, not during it. I've been to enough Whitfield family events derailed by badly timed honesty. Pick your moment, then take it." She left before I could ask how much she actually suspected, and I stood there with a half-organized bar cart, and the growing, uncomfortable certainty that I was running out of excuses not to tell Alex the whole truth. Not the architect's intuition version. All of it. Not tonight, though. Tonight, I told myself, was for swans and seating charts, and one more evening of pretending the hardest conversation of my life could wait just a little longer. Saturday came in gray and restless, the sky doing that specific pre-hurricane thing where it looks bruised and patient at once, like it's waiting for permission. The villa, against all odds and thanks to a full week of very determined structural work, looked breathtaking. Atrium glass gleaming, string lights strung along the terrace rails, the great room set with round tables that caught the last of the daylight and threw it back in soft gold. Eleanor held court by the bar, martini in hand, delighted by the chaos of caterers and investors, and one very stressed event planner running the whole operation through a headset like a general. Alex found me by the atrium doors 20 minutes before guests arrived, dressed sharp enough to be a genuine structural hazard in his own right. "Nervous?" he asked, straightening my collar with the kind of casual intimacy that still made my whole chest go warm and stupid. "About the storm, or about the part where I let your grandmother interrogate me about nesting instincts and threaten to redecorate my future guest wing?" "Both, honestly. She likes you. She's already picked out paint swatches. We've been official for a week." "She's efficient." He kissed my temple, quick and easy, like it was already a habit, and something in me settled, not because I'd stopped being scared of what tonight might hold, but because for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I wasn't facing it alone, and he wasn't either. "Whatever happens tonight," he added, quieter, "I know it's not going to be like whatever's been keeping you up at night this week. You don't have to protect me from anything, Daniel." "That's not what this is," I almost told him then. The atrium of Datter where I died holding his weight off the ground with my own spine. But the doors opened, investors started filtering in, and the moment folded itself away, saved for later, the way the good, terrifying truths always are. No more saving him, I'd told myself 9 days ago. Turned out the actual plan, the one that stuck, was better. No more saving him alone. The storm made landfall 2 days ahead of the last forecast, exactly like I remembered. Wind screaming in off the water, rain lashing the atrium glass in silver sheets, the whole house groaning pleasantly under the weight of a system it had been built, this time, to actually survive. Investors gasped and pulled out their phones to film the storm through reinforced glass like it was the show they'd paid for. Eleanor cackled into her martini and declared it the best entertainment budget line item all year. Right on schedule, during Alex's keynote toast to a room full of the East Coast's most important real estate money, the power flickered. Preston, positioned suspiciously near the AV booth with the smug patience of a man watching his own plan unfold, actually smiled. The lights did not go out. Instead, every screen in the great room, 6 of them, strategically placed by one extremely petty and extremely prepared event planner, lit up simultaneously with high-definition security footage. Preston Cole, splicing a relay into the backup generator line while whispering, "This'll teach that architect to stick his nose in," to absolutely nobody, because villains apparently cannot resist narrating themselves. All set, per Mia's insistence, to genuinely excellent dramatic music. The room went dead silent, then erupted. "That's," Preston started, going the specific shade of pale that only happens when a man realizes his sabotage has just been broadcast to the exact investors he was trying to impress. "Sabotage of critical infrastructure during a Category 2 hurricane," Alex said into the microphone, voice perfectly, terrifyingly calm, caught on the security system I personally approved. "Preston, I believe your consulting contract has a clause about conduct unbecoming a strategic partner." "Mia, do we have that clause handy?" "Section 14, subsection C." Mia said sweetly into her headset, not looking up from her clipboard. "Any act of intentional sabotage results in immediate termination and forfeiture of consulting fees." I highlighted it, in pink, for emphasis. Bradley Whitfield, watching his business partner get walked out of a hurricane purity guards and a room full of laughing investors, looked like he wanted the atrium glass to finally, mercifully fall on him instead. "This is a setup," Preston spat, being physically escorted toward the door as thunder rattled the reinforced windows behind him. "It's accountability," I said, stepping up beside Alex, unable to resist. "You should try it sometime. Also, that relay splice was genuinely sloppy work. I fixed the timing on it Wednesday night. The power never would have actually gone out. You just embarrassed yourself on camera for nothing." The room laughed harder. Somewhere near the bar, Eleanor raised her martini glass in my direction, like a woman toasting the single best plot twist of her entire life. Preston got dragged out into the rain, still shouting something about lawyers, and the hurricane, chaos, one publicly disgraced saboteur and all, kept right on going, warmer and louder than before, like the whole room had collectively decided this was the best party any of them had ever survived. Alex turned to me in the middle of it all, rain lashing the glass, string lights flickering gold against the storm, and pulled me in by the back of the neck. "You knew," he said. "Not a question." "I fixed the bracing bolts before you even knew they were wrong," I said. "I've had a very thorough week, Whitfield. You could have told me." And missed the look on your face when Mia's clipboard ruined a man's whole life in real time, complete with a soundtrack? Never. He laughed with his whole chest, rough and unguarded, nothing like the practiced boardroom version, and kissed me in front of God, Eleanor, and a room full of very entertained investors, while a hurricane howled outside a building that, this time, held. The party wound down past midnight, guests trickling out into a storm that had already downgraded to a steady, unthreatening rain, investors clutching signed term sheets and stories they'd be telling at dinner parties for years. Eleanor fell asleep in an armchair by the bar with her shoes off and a satisfied smile on her face, looking like a woman who'd gotten everything she wanted out of the evening and then some. I found Alex on the terrace afterward, jacket off, tie undone, staring out at a sea gone dark and restless under a sky finally clearing at the edges. "You're doing the thing again," he said, without turning around. "The thing where you look at me like you're relieved I'm still breathing." I froze. I really need to work on my poker face. That got a small laugh out of him. Quiet, tired, real. "You could start by not looking at me like I'm a ghost you're happy to see." He turned to face me, gentle in a way that undid something in my chest I'd been holding together with sheer stubbornness for 9 straight days. "I'm not going to push. But I've been thinking about it all week. The way you checked those bolts before anyone asked you to. The way you knew about Preston before there was any real evidence. The way you keep looking at me like you already survived losing me once." He paused. "Did something happen, Daniel, before this week?" The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the terrace slick and silver under the last of the string lights, and I thought about lying one more time, and found, for the first time all week, that I didn't have it in me. "You're going to think I'm insane," I said. "I run a company where my cousin's business partner sabotaged my grandmother's dream house during a hurricane, on camera, with a full villain monologue. My bar for insane is currently somewhere in orbit, so," I told him. "All of it, the atrium, the glass, the phone call that came too late in a life that technically never happened anymore, the 9 days I'd spent white-knuckling a version of this story where I refused to save him and ended up unable to stop myself anyway." I kept it shorter than it wanted to be, mostly because Alex's face was doing something devastating and I needed to get through it before I lost my nerve, and partly because I still, even now, couldn't resist ending it with, "So, Long story short, you owe me a very large fruit basket for services rendered across 2 timelines. Alex huffed out something between a laugh and a breath he'd been holding. You died, he said finally, voice rough, holding up glass. For me. And your first instinct, telling me about it, is to ask for a fruit basket. I contain multitudes. You died, Daniel. In a version of this that doesn't exist anymore, I said, gentler now. That's the whole point, Alex. It didn't happen this time. I fixed it. It matters to me, he said, and pulled me in, both arms around me like he could go back and physically prevent it if he just held on tight enough. It matters that some version of you thought I was worth dying for and never once thought you were worth living for. Daniel, look at me. I did. His eyes were wet and he didn't bother hiding it. You don't have to earn staying alive around me. You don't have to keep proving it. I would rather lose every investor in that room tonight than lose you under a single pane of glass in any version of any story. Do you understand me? That's bad business, I said, voice cracking despite my best efforts at deflection. I don't care, Alex said. Marry me eventually. Not tonight, God, we've been official for a week. My grandmother would actually combust from joy, and I'm not remotely ready for that paperwork, but eventually. I mean it. I want every version of this story from here on out, and I want you in all of them, alive, annoying me about bracing bolts until we're both old and cranky like Eleanor. I laughed, wet and startled, into his shoulder. That's the least romantic proposal adjacent sentence I've ever heard. I panicked. Give me a few years, I'll workshop it. You'd better, I said, and kissed him there, on the drying terrace, under a sky finally fully clear in a life I had built on purpose this time, board by board, bolt by bolt, choosing him, and choosing to let myself be chosen right back, every single day since. Here's the thing about second chances nobody tells you. They don't come with a manual for what to do after you survive. I found out over the following months, mostly by accident. It turns out surviving looks like Sunday mornings at Alex's place with too much coffee and not enough clothes, arguing about whether the guest wing needs less ego and more light. My words, thrown back at me constantly, framed and mounted in his office like a personal challenge. It looks like Mia getting promoted to head of events at Whitfield Coastal Holdings and immediately instituting a strict no-known saboteurs hiring policy, plus a smaller, more petty policy about requiring dramatic music approval on any future security footage. It looks like Eleanor showing up unannounced with wedding magazines 8 months before anyone had proposed anything, muttering about hip replacements and grandchildren in the same sentence like they were equally urgent. It looks, mostly, like being loved by a man who says my name like it's still the best sentence he knows, and getting to hear it every single day instead of just once, right before glass came down. I never told Alex the full truth in as much detail as I'd told him that first night. The exact weight of the glass, the exact sound of his voice screaming for help that never came fast enough. Some things you carry so the person you love doesn't have to carry them the same way twice. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind picks up off the Atlantic and rattles the windows just enough to remember by, he pulls me a little closer without being asked, like some quiet part of him already knows what he'll never remember, and says, low against my hair, stay right there, I've got you. And I do. Every time. No more saving him alone. Turns out that was the whole point. I still think, Alex said, tying his bow tie for the 3rd time. Apparently marrying an architect had made him weirdly perfectionist about symmetry, that we should have eloped, skipped all this. Your grandmother would have disowned you, I said, fixing his tie for him, because he clearly could not be trusted with it. She's been planning this since approximately 4 days into us dating. I have text messages. She sent me a seating chart before you'd even said the word boyfriend out loud. She likes you more than she likes me. It's genuinely concerning. She has excellent taste. We were getting married in the great room of Seaview Crest Villa. The same room, the same atrium glass overhead, though this time under a sky so aggressively, cheerfully blue it felt like the universe was showing off. No hurricanes. No saboteurs, since Preston Cole had last been heard of doing strategic consulting for a struggling mini-golf course 2 states over, a career trajectory Mia brought up at every single opportunity with undisguised glee. 5 minutes, Mia said, poking her head into the room, headset still permanently attached to her skull even off the clock, because some habits never die. Eleanor's already crying, which means the photographer's already crying, which means we're on a schedule now, gentlemen. Let's move. Alex caught my hand before I could follow her out, pulling me in for a kiss that tasted like nerves and champagne and 2 full years of Sunday mornings. "Whatever made you decide to fix those bolts that week," he murmured against my mouth. "Whatever it was, thank you. I don't know what I would have done if something happened to you before I even got the chance to." He stopped, shook his head, laughed at himself. "I don't know. I just know I'm glad you're here. All of you. Every part of you, even the parts you don't like talking about." I thought briefly about glass and screaming, and a phone call that came too late in a life that no longer existed anywhere except in my own memory. "I'm not going anywhere," I said instead, which was truer than he'd ever know. "You're stuck with me, structurally sound and everything." "Best decision Whitfield Coastal Holdings ever made," Alex said, grinning. "Hiring the architect who talks about bracing bolts like foreplay." They were very good bolts. Married. To an architect. Who I am not letting near the honeymoon suite's floor plan because I already caught you sketching load calculations on the hotel stationery. That's called being thorough. "That's called you not knowing how to turn it off," Alex said, tugging me toward the doors, toward Eleanor's happy tears and Mia's clipboard, and a room full of people who had no idea how close this whole story had once come to ending very differently. Somewhere behind us, I heard Eleanor loudly informing a bewildered guest that she'd known it from the very first sunroom meeting, which was, generously, a stretch, and Mia threatening a photographer's assistant with a clipboard for standing in the wrong spot during the processional. It was chaos. It was, in every way that mattered, exactly the kind of chaos I wanted for the rest of my life. Outside, the Atlantic rolled in calm and easy under a cloudless sky, exactly the way it should. No typhoon, no falling glass, just the ocean doing what oceans do, and a house, sound, solid, built to last, standing steady against it, the way I'd promised it would from the very first blueprint. Some things, I'd learned, were worth designing twice. He was one of them. And that's the whole story. Glass, grandmothers, one deeply unimpressive villain, and a second chance I almost wasted worrying instead of living. If you enjoyed the ride, follow the channel so you don't miss the next one. There's always another impossible alpha and another terrible weather forecast waiting in the wings. See you there.